The afternoon has been quietly slipping away from you for some time now. You first noticed it an hour ago, maybe a little more, when the light coming through the small window above the counter shifted from pale gold to something deeper. Something more amber. The kind of light that arrives only in autumn, only in the late part of the day, when the sun is low enough to come in sideways and turn ordinary dust into something that floats like flecks of old bronze. You paused what you were doing then. You stood with a small glass stirring rod in one hand and watched the light for a moment, and the light did not seem to mind being watched. That is the thing about this time of year in Thistlewick. Autumn does not rush. It arrives gradually, deliberately, like a neighbor who has come a long way and intends to stay. It settles itself into the corners of rooms. It finds its way under doors. It makes itself comfortable. Outside, through the thick glass of the window overlooking Sable Street, you can see the cobblestones. They are damp from this morning's fog, which came in off the harbor the way it always does. Quietly, without announcing itself, as though it simply woke up and found itself already here. The fog lifted by mid-morning, but the stones kept the memory of it. They are dark and faintly glistening, and the last of the gold light catches them in a way that makes them look like they are lit from within. Somewhere, not too far away, wood smoke. You can smell it even through the closed door. Someone has lit their hearth early tonight, which means they know what you know, that the air has that particular edge to it. Sharp without being cold, somehow. The kind of air that promises. The weather will turn tonight, or tomorrow morning at the latest. The harbor folk have been saying so for 3 days. Old Aldrich stopped by on Tuesday and looked at the sky for a long moment before he said anything, the way he always does, as though he is reading something written there. "First frost before the week's out," he said, settling onto the stool by the counter. Sky's got that look about it. He bought his monthly Clarity tonic and left his empty last month's bottle on the counter as always, which you will wash and refill and keep waiting for him. His bottle is on the shelf now. Clean, stoppered with a cork, the label in your own careful hand. Ready. You turn back to the workbench. The shop smells, as it always does, of beeswax and dried chamomile. But underneath that familiar foundation there is something else tonight, something you have been building slowly through the afternoon, layer by layer, the way you always build the evening batch. Valerian root, which has a deep earthy warmth to it, almost like the smell of good soil after rain. A small bundle of dried lavender from the back garden at Greenmere's, which Pip brought over this morning along with a note from old Marta Greenmere asking whether you still had any surplus of the sleep draught, and whether you might share a dozen bottles before the frost came, because her backroom customers had been asking for it all week. Which is why you are making the last batch before the first frost. There is a particular quality to this batch, and you have known it all afternoon. Some batches are routine. Some batches are more. This one has that feeling about it. The feeling of a thing done at exactly the right time. The shop is small, and you know every inch of it the way you know a song you have been humming for years. 3 walls of shelves, floor to ceiling, running all the way from the door to the window on the alley side. The shelves are old, older than your tenancy here, older than anyone who currently lives on Sable Street can clearly remember, and they are made of a dark wood that has absorbed so much beeswax over the years that they gleam even in dim light. The bottles on the shelves are amber and green, and occasionally a deep blue so dark it looks almost black. They are stoppered with cork. They are labeled in a careful hand. Every one of them is arranged in a particular order that makes sense to you and would make sense to no one else. Near the door, on the left side, are the quick remedies. The headache ease tincture. The fog of a long week tonic. The sore throat relief, which smells strongly of honey and pine. These are the ones people come in for on a moment's notice, or send their children in for with a few coins and a scrawled note. These shelves are restocked most often. The middle shelves, the ones at eye level, hold what you think of as the feeling bottles. The grief ease tea, which is pale amber and smells faintly of cardamom and chamomile, and something you have never quite been able to name. The anxiety quiet tincture, which works differently for different people. Some say it slows their thoughts, some say it simply makes the thoughts feel further away, less urgent. The loneliness ease blend, which you make with dried elderflower and a small measure of something the forest which taught you, and which you always feel a little careful making, because it is a tender thing to address. The upper shelves hold the rarer things. The longer working batches. The things that take months or years to properly steep. And at the very top, on the highest shelf of all, the shelf you need the stepstool to reach, there sits the amber bottle. It has been there since before you came. It will probably be there after. No one is quite sure what is in it. The label, whatever it once said, has faded past reading. You have always left it where it is, and it has always seemed content to stay. Tonight, in the low gold light, you notice that the amber bottle seems to be catching the sunset in a way that makes it glow from the inside. You notice this, and you nod slightly, and you go back to what you are doing. The workbench runs along the back wall, beneath the small window that overlooks the alley. The alley between Sable Street and the lane behind is narrow, and because of this, the light that comes through the window is always soft. Filtered. It arrives as though it has been thought about. This is the best kind of light to work in. It does not press. On the bench in front of you, a ceramic bowl, wide and shallow, the color of old cream. A small brass scale with a set of weights in a worn leather pouch. The glass stirring rod. 3 shallow dishes containing the ingredients for tonight's batch, each of them measured and waiting. A small copper pot, its interior darkened with years of use, sitting over the small spirit lamp whose flame is doing its usual thing, burning low and steady and perfectly consistent in a way that, technically, it has no reason to. You have always thought of the spirit lamp as a small magic. The flame burns. The pot is warming. The valerian root steeps in the pot, its deep earthy smell beginning to fill the space between the workbench and the shelf behind you, and you take a slow breath of it and feel something in your shoulders ease. The Harbour Bell rings. The sound comes through the walls and through the window glass, and it settles into the room the way it always does. Not startlingly, not with any great announcement, simply arriving and filling the space for a moment before it fades. 5 o'clock. You count the rings without meaning to, as you always do. Somewhere in Thistlewick, in every room and shop and cottage and boat, other people are counting them too without meaning to. 5 o'clock means the market has been finished for an hour. It means the fishing boats that went out this morning are either back or close to it. It means the light will be gone in a little over an hour, and the fog, or something like it, will probably come creeping back in off the harbor sometime after dark. You add the first measure of dried valerian to the pot, tipping it carefully from the shallow dish, and watch the pale brown flakes drift down through the warming water. They turn slowly. They sink at different speeds. There is no urgency anywhere in this. The shop around you breathes. That is the best way you have ever found to say it. The shop breathes. The smell shifts slightly as the valerian warms. The candles on the counter, 2 of them, in holders that you have always thought were probably very old pewter, though they are too worn to be certain, throw a light that moves gently in some draught you cannot locate. The boards beneath your feet are smooth from years of standing at this workbench, and they are warm despite the autumn chill, in a way that wooden floors are not usually warm. You reach for the lavender. It is a particular lavender, dried in late summer, the stems still partly intact, tied with a piece of rough twine that still smells faintly of the Greenmere garden where it was bundled. You crumble the dried flowers between your palms over the pot, slowly, feeling them give under your fingers. The smell rises immediately, clean and herbal and faintly sweet. It mixes with the valerian, and for a moment the combination is something specific and good and hard to name. Outside, somewhere down Sable Street, you can hear footsteps. Someone walking unhurriedly on the damp cobblestones. You do not look up. The footsteps pass. You stir. The glass rod moves through the pot in slow circles. The water is beginning to take on the faintest pale amber color. Not amber like the bottles, not yet, but the first suggestion of it. You watch the color form. It is not unlike watching fog gather, in that it seems to arrive from nowhere and nowhere in particular, simply becoming present gradually. There is a small cat named Ember who belongs to no one in particular on Sable Street and to everyone in particular. She is a ginger tabby, mid-sized, with one ear that sits slightly lower than the other from an old disagreement with a fence post that no one witnessed directly. She visits the shop several evenings a week. She has not yet arrived tonight, but you expect her, because the first cold evenings always bring her. You think about Ember while you stir. You think about how she will come in if the door is unlatched when she arrives, or sit in a precise oval shape on the top step if it is not, and wait with the particular patience of a cat who is certain she will eventually be let in and finds no reason to fuss about the timing. The thought of her sitting there, tail wrapped around her paws, amber eyes half closed, is such a comfortable one that you find your own eyes going soft for a moment. You blink. You go back to stirring. The second ingredient is the one that requires the most care. Moon petal, you call it, though that is not its formal name. You learned it years ago from a trader who came through Thistlewick on his way up the coast, and the name stuck because it suits. It is a dried flower, very pale silver-white when fresh, and when dried it holds that silver quality in a way that most dried things lose their color. The petals are small and feel almost dusty between your fingers. They dissolve quickly in warm water. Too much and the sleep draught doesn't invite rest, it insists upon it. Which is not the feeling you are going for. You measure carefully. A small pinch. You hold it over the pot for a moment, just making sure, running through the familiar calculation in the back of your mind. The pot size. The number of bottles you mean to fill. Old Marta's 12, and the rest for the shop shelf. You add the moon petal slowly, a few petals at a time, watching them land on the surface of the warming water and begin to soften. A bloom of silver white unfolds in the water and then dissolves, like breath on cold air. You stir again, slower this time, and you are aware of the warmth of the lamp against the backs of your hands, and the smell of the batch building now, becoming something fuller and more complete. It smells the way that the last hour before sleep sometimes feels. Not drowsy exactly. More like, already elsewhere. Already in the place between. You stand with the rod resting against the side of the pot, and you listen. The shop makes its small sounds. The candle flames move. The boards tick quietly in the cooling evening. From the far end of Sable Street, probably from the direction of the harbor, you can hear the low note of a boat somewhere, a sort of foghorn murmur that is not quite a bell and not quite a horn, something in between. It comes and it goes. It is not calling to you, exactly. But it is there, the way all sounds in Thistlewick are there in the evening, like company that doesn't require you to say anything. You breathe. The third ingredient is honey. Your honey comes from the hives at the edge of the bramble. The beekeeper is a quiet man named Solon who brings you a sealed crock of it every September, and this September's crock is still most of the way full. The honey is dark, this year's pressing, almost mahogany-colored when you hold it up to the light, and it smells of late summer clover and something resinous that you suspect comes from the forest edge where the hives are kept. You take the small copper ladle and scoop a measure. You hold it over the pot, watching the slow pull of the honey as it stretches and releases, the amber thread catching the lamplight. You add the honey. You stir. The smell shifts again, becomes warmer, rounder. The lavender and valerian and moon petal now have a sweetness underneath them, a depth. You lower your face closer to the pot and breathe in slowly, and the warmth of the steam is gentle against your skin. This is the batch. You feel it. You have felt it since you started, but now you are certain. This is the one that will work especially well, for reasons you cannot fully account for. The quality of the night air, the particular freshness of the lavender, some quality of attention you brought to it. Whatever the reason, you can already tell. You stand back a little. You let the batch simmer. While the pot works on the bench behind you, you turn to the rest of the shop and do the small evening tasks. You take the morning's notes from the counter, a few lines scrawled on a folded piece of paper, reminders to yourself. Refill the fog of a long week tonic, the supply is getting low. Check the chamomile at the back of the drying cupboard. Write to the coast trader about more moon petal before the season turns and the boats stop running the full route. You look at these notes, you think about each one, and then you tuck the paper under the counter beside the small wooden box where you keep the shop's daily coins, and you let the thoughts settle into tomorrow, where they belong. You straighten the stools at the counter. There are two, both of dark wood, both worn at the seat, one slightly lower than the other because of some old repair to its legs that was done well but not perfectly. You know which customers prefer which one. Old Aldrich always takes the taller one without looking at it, purely by habit. Marin, when she comes, takes the lower one and hooks her feet on the bottom rung and wraps her hands around whatever you've made her. Marin. You find yourself thinking of her as you straighten the second stool. She was at the market today. You saw her at the edge of the square while you were walking back from Greenmere's with the lavender that Pip gave you. Though you didn't call to her, she was busy talking to the woman who sells the winter roots and didn't see you. She had her gray wool coat on, the one with the deep pockets, and she was nodding at something the root seller was saying with that expression she has, that patient, attentive look that makes whoever is talking feel like what they're saying is genuinely interesting. She might stop by this evening. She often does, on market Thursdays, because the market leaves her with a restless sort of energy that a cup of something warm tends to settle. Not always. But you would not be surprised. You take the small cloth from the shelf below the counter and you wipe down the counter surface, slowly, following the grain of the dark wood. The cloth is soft. The wood is smooth. There is a faint ring near the left end of the counter from a hot mug set down countless times in the same spot, which you have no desire to try to remove, because it is part of the counter now. Part of the record of all the cups of tea that have been held here, the hands that have held them, the conversations that were had in this small warm room. You wipe around the ring. You hang the cloth on the hook below the shelf. You look at the row of bottles near the door, the quick remedies, and you check them the way you do every evening. Running your eye along the shelf, reading the labels, noting which ones are running low. The sore throat relief is down to 2. You will need to make more before the cold weather fully sets in, because the cold weather and the sore throat relief are acquainted in a way that reliably depletes your supply. You make a small mental note, and the mental note settles in beside the written note under the counter, and you feel, in a mild and comfortable way, like a person who has things arranged. The Harbour Bell rings 6. You almost didn't need it. The light through the front window has shifted again, going from amber to something deeper, the particular blue-gray of early evening that comes in autumn when the sun has gone below the harbour hills but hasn't quite left the sky. The cobblestones outside are darkening. The lamp in the window of the chandlery across the street has been lit. There is a warm rectangle of light falling from the door of the small tobacconist 2 doors down, where the old man who runs it is almost certainly sitting in his chair by the window with something to smoke, the way he is every evening. You turn back to the workbench. The batch is ready to come off the heat. You know this not by any particular signal. The color is right, a warm pale amber that is deeper than when you started, and the smell is right, fully rounded now, all its parts married into something whole. You know it also by a quality of the room, of the air, that is difficult to explain except to say that the shop seems to have become very slightly more still. As though the batch becoming what it needed to become has settled something. You take the pot off the spirit lamp. You set it to the side, on the ceramic tile that lives on the corner of the workbench for this purpose. The flame on the spirit lamp drops lower without the pot above it, settling into its usual low steady burn. You let the batch sit for a moment. It needs to cool slightly before it goes into bottles, just enough that the glass doesn't cloud. While it cools, you wash your hands in the small basin at the end of the workbench, the water cold from the copper pipe that runs from the cistern in the back room. You dry your hands on the clean cloth hanging beside the basin. You run your thumb over the tips of your fingers, which still smell faintly of lavender and valerian. Then you take the bottles from the shelf behind the bench. You have prepared them already, washed this morning, dried through the afternoon, standing in a row of 12 for Marta's order and 8 more for the shop shelf. 20 bottles total. You set them in 2 rows on the bench beside the cooling pot, their empty dark amber glass catching the lamplight. You take the small funnel, and you begin to pour. This is one of the most satisfying parts of the whole process. The slow tipping of the pot. The way the liquid moves through the funnel with that particular unhurried flow. The filling of each bottle in turn, not too fast, not so slow that you lose the thread of it. The smell rises with the pouring. By the time you are halfway through the row, the whole bench smells of the batch, and the air between you and the shelf is thick with something warm and sweet and restful. You work your way through the row. You do not think of anything in particular while you fill the bottles. You simply fill the bottles. Your hands know what to do. When the last bottle is filled, and you have tipped the last drops of the pot carefully, and set the pot down and lifted the funnel clear, you stand with your hands resting on the edge of the bench, and look at the 2 rows of stoppered bottles. The amber glass holds the warmth of the liquid. The room holds the smell of it. You feel a deep, particular satisfaction. The kind that comes from a thing done well and done at the right time. That is when the bell above the door rings. It is a small bell, brass, old, hung on a coiled spring. You have never adjusted it. It rings with a light, clean sound when the door opens, and you know it so well, its exact pitch, the slight shiver of its tone, that you have been hearing it ring in your dreams for as long as you have worked here. You turn. In the doorway, stamping the damp from his boots on the mat, is Pip. He is 17, Pip, though he presents as younger most of the time, slight, with a tendency to hold books against his chest even when he isn't carrying any, and a look about his eyes that suggests he is always turning something over in his mind, working through some small problem that no one else can see. He apprentices at Greenmere's apothecary, under old Marta herself, which means he has been learning the trade of dried herbs and botanical remedies since he was 14, and he knows a great deal, though he is still not entirely sure how to be comfortable knowing it. He has a long coat on tonight, gray wool, a little too big for him, almost certainly borrowed from someone, and he is carrying a basket covered with a cloth. "Good evening," he says, and then clears his throat slightly, because his voice is still at the age where it occasionally has opinions of its own. "Marta sent me with the delivery. The remaining lavender from the September harvest. She says you'd asked after it." "I did," you say. "Come in." He comes in, wiping his feet properly on the mat, and closes the door behind him, and the shop bell gives a small shiver of departure as the door settles into its frame. Pip looks around the shop the way he always does when he visits. Not for the first time, certainly not for the last, but with the expression of someone who finds the room genuinely interesting every time. His eyes travel along the shelves. They pause, briefly, at the amber bottle at the top of the high shelf. They always pause there. "You've been brewing," he says. The smell of the batch is still very much present in the room, and he says it with a slightly odd quality, the way he always does when he arrives in the middle, or just after a working. "The sleep draft," you say. "Marta's order, plus a bit extra. It's still cooling." You nod toward the bench. He sets the basket on the counter with the careful deliberateness of someone who has been trained not to set things down carelessly, and he lifts the cloth. Inside, packed in dry straw, are 6 small bundles of dried lavender, each one tied with the same rough twine as the bundle he brought this morning. The smell of it reaches you even across the counter. "This is the last of the September harvest," Pip says. "Marta says she doesn't expect another cutting before the frost. She says to use it well." "Tell her I will," you say. "She also said to ask you." He hesitates, the slight hesitation of someone delivering a message they weren't entirely sure they remembered correctly. "She wanted to know if you'd ever heard of using apple blossom in the sleep draft. She found a very old reference to it in one of the library books," she said, "and she thought it might be worth asking." You think about this for a moment. "Apple blossom in the sleep draft," you repeat, not because you didn't hear him, but because you are turning it over. "In spring, maybe. There's a quality to apple blossom that doesn't hold well in drying. It goes flat. For a summer batch, possibly. But for this time of year." You trail off, considering. Tell her to keep the reference. It's worth following up in the spring. Pip nods carefully, like he is storing this, filing it precisely. "Also," he says, slightly more quietly, "I wanted to ask you something." You look at him. "I've been trying to understand the grief ease formula," he says. I don't mean I want the recipe, I'm not asking you for that. I mean I'm trying to understand the principle of it. What it's doing. Why it works on feelings when the herbals themselves are physical things. Marta says the answer is in the intention of the maker, but I don't fully understand what that means." He is looking at you with the earnest, slightly anxious look of a person who wants to understand something and is not sure whether they're allowed to want it. You come around the counter. "That," you say, "is a very good question." He exhales slightly, as though he'd been holding a small amount of tension, waiting to see if it was. "And I'll give you an honest answer," you say, "which is that I'm not entirely sure either. But I can tell you what I think." You lean against the counter, and he settles on the lower stool without being invited, which is exactly what you were hoping he'd do. "The herbals do what the herbals do," you say. "Valerian calms the body. Chamomile eases the stomach and the mind together. Lavender signals to something old in us that it is time to rest. That part is real, and it is the same whether or not there is any magic in the room. You glance at the batch cooling on the bench. But the feeling that comes with a batch made in the shop, the particular quality of it, the way people sometimes say they feel seen by it, or comforted in a way they didn't expect, I think that part comes from something about attention. Pip is very still on the stool, listening. When I make a batch of grief ease tea, you continue, I am thinking about grief. Not abstractly. I am thinking about the particular feeling of it. The way it sits in the chest. The way it changes the quality of light. I'm thinking about all the people I've ever seen come through that door holding that weight. And I think, I believe, though I can't prove it, that some of that attention goes into the batch. Not deliberately. Not by any act of will. Just because we are what we pay attention to, and the batch is made of what we bring to it. Pip is quiet for a moment. So if you made it while you were distracted, he says, slowly, or while you were in a bad mood, it would still work, you say. Because the herbals are still the herbals. But it might not have that extra quality. That sense of being understood. You shrug, lightly. Or maybe it would. I can't always tell where the herbals end and the rest begins. He thinks about this. That's both more and less mysterious than I expected, he says. You smile. Most things are, you say. He sits with that for a moment, and you let him, and the shop holds the comfortable quiet of a question being properly digested. Outside, the last of the day's light is almost entirely gone now. The cobblestones are dark. The lamp in the chandlery across the street is the brightest thing you can see through the front window. Pip sets his hands on his knees and stands. I should get back, he says. Marta will be wanting her supper. He picks up the now empty basket, he has left the lavender on the counter, and slings it over his arm. Then he looks at the cooling bottles on the bench. Will you have the order ready by tomorrow? I'll walk them over in the morning, you say. She'll be pleased, he says. And then, quietly, thank you for explaining. Come back when you have another question, you say. There are usually several more. He nods, and there is a small smile at the corner of his mouth, and he opens the door. The bell rings its clear small note. A breath of cold night air comes briefly into the room. And then the door closes and he is gone, and his footsteps fade down Sable Street, and the shop is itself again. You stand for a moment, listening to the silence he left behind. Then you take the bundles of lavender from the counter and carry them carefully to the drying cupboard in the back room. The back room is small and warm, heated by the same flue that serves the front shop's spirit lamp and also a small iron stove that you keep burning low through the autumn and winter months. In the back room there is a work table, less tidy than the bench in front, and a tall drying cupboard with slatted doors, and a deep shelf where you keep your reference books and your order records and a few personal things that have accumulated over time without any particular intention. Among the personal things on the deep shelf, a small stone in a pale gray-blue color that you found on the harbor walk one morning and liked the weight of. A dried arrangement that a previous tenant of the shop left behind, somewhat faded now, a bundle of sea lavender and dried heather, still sweet-smelling if you lean close. 3 small candles in colored glass, gifts from various customers at various times, red and amber and a dark forest green. A worn volume on botanical magic with a cracked spine that you have read so many times it falls open to the middle pages without prompting. You arrange the lavender bundles on the drying shelf. They don't need drying, they are already dry, but they are better kept there than anywhere else, on the slatted wood, in the dark with the other dried things. You stand in the back room for a moment. The iron stove makes a sound, a small settling sound from somewhere inside it, as it always does in the early evening when the metal is adjusting to its own warmth. You like this sound. It is the sound of a room making itself comfortable. You think about making a cup of something for yourself. You go back to the front of the shop, and you put the small kettle, kept on the back corner of the workbench for exactly this purpose, on the spirit lamp. The flame accepts the weight of it and continues its steady burning. You take a mug from the shelf below the counter. It is your mug, the one you use here every evening, and it is a little chipped on the rim, not enough to catch your lip, just enough to know it by touch. It is a particular shade of blue, the mug, that reminded you when you first found it of the bay on a gray morning, that specific still blue-gray that the harbor gets. You have had it for years. You do not remember exactly where it acquired the chip, but you have the sense it was some small accident that was not worth remembering. Only the mug was worth keeping. You set the mug on the counter. You take down the tin of chamomile, your own chamomile, not the shop supply, though they come from the same source. It is the same, but there is a tin of it that you keep for yourself, and it lives on the middle shelf at the end nearest the door, and you always know where it is, and you take a pinch of chamomile and put it in the small mesh strainer that lives in the mug. Then you wait for the kettle. While the water heats, you take the stool that you don't usually sit on, the taller one, the one old Aldrich always takes, and you sit on it, and you fold your arms on the counter, and you look out the front window. Sable Street in the evening. It is fully dark out now, the darkness of a clear autumn night, and the lamps on the street posts are lit. 2 of them visible from your window, their light pooling on the damp cobblestones and reflecting in a way that makes the puddles look like small illuminated windows themselves. The chandlery across the street is closed, its door dark, but the lamp in the window still burns, probably on a timer of some kind, some domestic magic that Vera the chandler set years ago and has never felt the need to adjust. There is no one on the street right now. It is that particular hour, after supper has started and before anyone needs to go anywhere again, when Sable Street tends to go quiet. The kettle begins to hiss softly, and then, something. A shape at the lower left corner of the window. Low to the ground, unhurried. A ginger tabby coming up the street with the particular swagger of a cat who goes exactly where she intends to go and arrives precisely when she means to. Ember. She stops at the foot of the step. You can just see her, a small shape in the lamplight, and she looks at the door. You get up from the stool. You take the kettle off the lamp. You go to the door and you open it, and the cold night air comes in, and Ember comes in with it, walking past your legs without acknowledging you, which is her way. Good evening, you say to her. She does not reply, which is also her way. You pour your tea. The chamomile opens in the hot water and the smell of it rises, clean and herbal and a little sweet, and you wrap both hands around the mug and feel the warmth of it through your palms. Ember has jumped onto the counter, which she is not supposed to do, technically, but the technical rule has never been enforced and she has been doing it for as long as you can remember, and she has arranged herself at the far end, near the window, facing the door. Her tail is curled around her front paws. Her eyes are half closed. She is the picture of settled comfort, and looking at her makes something in you ease. You sit on the low stool this time, because your feet are beginning to feel the day. You drink your tea slowly. The shop is so quiet now that you can hear, very faintly, the harbor. Not the bell. The bell won't ring again until 7. But the water itself. The soft, distant sound of it, the slight moving weight of the bay in the night. It comes through the walls of old stone buildings the way sound does when the town goes quiet enough, arriving not as a sound exactly, but as a presence. You feel it more than hear it. You close your eyes for just a moment. Outside, the cold is settling. You feel it at the gap under the door, a slight movement of cool air against your feet. The first frost, coming sometime in the night or early morning. The first frost that means the last of the summer herbs are properly over, and the drying season is complete, and what you have on your shelves now is what you have until the spring suppliers come through. But you have what you need. The backroom shelves are full. The bottles are corked and cooling on the workbench. The lavender is in the drying cupboard. You have what you need. When the shop bell rings the second time that evening, you are on your second cup of tea and Ember has moved from the counter to the lower shelf near the door, which she does when she is cold, because the shelf near the door is close to the heat that rises from the stone wall. Marin. You knew it was her before the door was fully open, because you know the particular rhythm of her knock. She always knocks once, lightly, and then opens the door herself without waiting, because she has been coming here long enough to know she doesn't need to wait. She comes in out of the cold night with her grey coat and her deep pockets and the faint smell of the market clinging to her. Dried things, autumn leaves, the particular cold clean of open air. She has her hair pinned up more tightly than usual, which means she has had a long day and keeps reaching up to fix it. She looks at you and she looks at the shop and her shoulders drop, just slightly, in the way that people's shoulders do when they enter a room that is warm and familiar and asks nothing of them. I thought you'd be here, she says. I'm always here, you say. She smiles at this in the small way she has. She unbuttons her coat without taking it off. She is not quite ready to commit to staying. Not yet, that is Marin's way, to remain in the in-between for a moment before deciding to land. And she settles on the tall stool, which is where she sits when she is tired, and she notices Ember on the lower shelf and bends slightly to look at her. Hello, small one, she says to Ember. Ember regards her with flat benevolence. How was the market, you say? Marin sets her elbows on the counter. She thinks about this, and you can see her thinking about it, turning over the day. Long, she says, finally. Busy for a Thursday. Probably because people know the weather's coming, and they wanted to get their last bits before the frost. She pauses. I sold all my preserves. Every jar. That's good, you say. It is, she agrees. It should feel better than it does. She turns the words over. Not bad, I don't mean bad. Just a long day, and then suddenly it's done. You know. You do know. The particular feeling of a thing being finished that you expected to feel more satisfied about. Do you want something? You say. I have the new sleep draft, if you want to take a bottle home. Or there's chamomile, I'm making some. She considers. Chamomile, she says, and one of the sleep drafts. But the chamomile first. You get up and put the kettle back on the lamp. Marin looks at the 20 bottles cooling on the workbench. Is that the last batch before the frost? She asks. It is, you say. It smells beautiful, she says. It came out well, you agree. She is quiet for a moment, looking at the bottles with an expression that is comfortable and a little wondering, the expression of someone who appreciates craft when they encounter it. Marin makes her own things, her preserves, her embroidery, some woodwork in the winters that she does not often talk about, and she understands the satisfaction of a thing made correctly. The kettle begins to hiss. Marin turns back to the counter and wraps her hands together on the dark wood, and you pour, and the smell of chamomile fills the space between you again. Pip came by earlier, you say, setting her mug in front of her. Oh, Pip. She smiles. I saw him coming down Sable Street when I was at the end of it. He had that look he gets when he's been given something to think about. I may have done that, you say. He'll be up half the night, she says, turning it over. He's 17, you say. He has the time. Marin laughs, a soft laugh, quiet. Fair, she says. She wraps her hands around the mug. She drinks. She makes a small sound of satisfaction that she doesn't seem aware of, the sound of warmth and chamomile arriving where they are needed. Outside, the Harbour Bell rings 7. You count it without meaning to. Marin's lips move slightly as she counts 2. It is such a familiar reflex. You both hear it, and you both count it, and neither of you comments on it, because it does not need commenting on. It is simply the hour. Can I ask you something? Marin says, after the bell has finished. Of course, you say. She turns the mug slowly between her palms. There is something she is working up to, you can feel it, not anything serious, just something that requires a small run-up. I've been thinking about my sister, she says. She's in Caldmere. I know, you say. You know Marin's sister is in Caldmere because Marin has mentioned her occasionally over the years, a woman named Seela, older by several years, who moved there with her husband some time ago. They write letters. They don't see each other often enough. It's been almost 2 years, Marin says, since I've seen her. I keep almost planning to go, and then the season changes and it doesn't happen. She drinks again. I think I might actually go this winter, before the roads get bad. I was thinking about it all day today, and I couldn't figure out why I kept not doing it. Why do you think you don't do it? You say. Marin is quiet for a moment. I think, she says, slowly, that I'm a little afraid she'll have changed. And I know that's silly, it's 2 years not 20, but I have this feeling whenever I think about going that things will be different. And I'm not sure I want them to be. They might be, you say. I know. But different doesn't necessarily mean lost, you say. Marin looks at you. I know that too, she says. I know it in my head. It's something else that knows differently. She touches the side of the mug. Maybe I should take one of your clarity tonics. Maybe, you say, lightly, though you seem fairly clear already. She smiles at that, a small private smile. I think I'll go, she says, as though settling something. I'll write to her this week. I think I've been waiting to decide, and I just decided. Good, you say. And that is all it needs to be. She has said the thing that needed saying, and it found a place to land, and now she is sitting more easily on the stool than she was 10 minutes ago, one elbow on the counter, the mug held loosely. You know what I love about this place, she says, after a while. It is not quite a question. Tell me, you say. Everything is in the right place, she says. She sweeps one hand in a slow arc that encompasses the bottles, the shelves, the candles, the amber glass and the worn dark wood and the faint lamp glow. I don't mean orderly. I just mean right. Like it all knows where it belongs. You think about this. I think it learned that, you say. Over time. She nods. Most good places do. The room after Marin leaves settles back into its quiet with the ease of a room that is accustomed to people leaving it better than they arrived. The door has barely closed before you feel the shop become itself again, fully, without qualification. It is the particular quality this place has. It holds whoever is in it, and then when they are gone it returns to its own nature, and the two states are both genuine. It is not less itself when someone is here, and not less welcoming when it is empty. Both things at once, always. You take Marin's mug and rinse it in the basin. You notice, as you dry it, that she has left her handprint on the lower half, the way hands leave marks on warm pottery. Not a smudge, just the slight warmth of where her palms rested. You set the mug on the drying shelf. You look at the night bloom bottles on the counter shelf, the 5 dark amber ones, and you find yourself thinking about who will come for them. You have learned, over years behind this counter, not to try to predict which person needs what. You have been wrong enough times to have given up the attempt. The person you expected to need the grief-ease tea comes in asking for the clarity tonic. The person you thought was doing perfectly well turns out to have been carrying something so quietly and for so long that they don't have words for it, and what you can offer them is just something warm and the presence of a room that doesn't require anything. But sometimes you get a feeling. You look at the night bloom and you think about winter. The particular quality of winter in Thistlewick, not cruel, as you know, never quite cruel, but long. There is a man on Cutter's Row, near the harbour, who lost someone last spring and has been walking the long way around the harbour every morning since, the way people walk when they are trying to tire out the inside of their mind. There is a woman at the edge of Fenwick Lane, an older woman, who has lived alone since her daughter moved east, and who you see sometimes on the market days standing for too long at a stall without buying anything. There is, you think, a fisherman from the lower docks, someone you don't know well but have seen enough to recognize, something in the set of his shoulders in the evenings. The night bloom is for the long nights. Thea found it at exactly the right time. The Brambles' gifts are like that. They arrive when the need for them has been building quietly and invisibly, and the arrival seems like coincidence only if you are not paying attention to the quality of the season. You breathe. You stand at the counter for a little while in the easy quiet, and you let the thoughts move through without holding them. The candles burn. Ember shifts on the shelf, resettles. The harbor makes its soft, barely there sound through the walls. You are aware, in these quiet minutes, of the weight of the day leaving you gradually. Not all at once. But the shoulders easing, then the jaw, then something in the chest unclenching millimeter by millimeter. This is the hour that the shop is best at, the particular hour after the visitors have gone and before you leave yourself, when the room is simply warm and you are simply here and there is nothing that needs doing immediately. You find yourself thinking about the apple blossom question pip brought from Marta Greenmere. You turn it over the way you turn things over, without urgency, letting it sit in the light of your attention. Apple blossom in the sleep draught. It is a thought worth carrying into spring. There is something in it, the idea that the opening of a season could be added to something meant for deep rest. The way a window opened briefly makes a room smell better without making it cold. It would want care. The balance would be delicate. But there might be something there. You reach for the small notebook kept under the counter, the one for ideas that come between batches, things to follow up, questions to investigate. You open it to a blank page and you write, Apple Blossom, Ref. Marta G. Spring batch? Investigate the drying quality. Ask about the library reference. You close the notebook. You put the pen away. And then you stand and listen to the town. The Harbour Bell is silent between hours, but the town is never silent. There is always something, the faint movement of water, someone's window shutter loose in the wind, a horse somewhere on the far end of Sable Street, the particular creak of an old building finding its position for the night. Thistlewick breathes, the way any old place breathes, and when you are still enough you can feel the rhythm of it, the long, patient breath of a place that has been here for a very long time and expects to be here for a great deal longer. You have thought, sometimes, about what Thistlewick was like 100 years ago. Before your shop, before the current harbor buildings, before half the cobblestones were laid. Probably similar. Probably someone stood in a warm room on this same street and heard the same harbor and felt the same quality of settled belonging. There is comfort in this thought, in the continuity of it. That the warmth of a room and a good evening and work done well are not new things, not unique to you or your time. That they are old, and that many people before you and many after will know them. You are part of a very long chain of people who locked a door in the dark and felt, on the way home, that the day was enough. The third visitor that evening arrives an hour later. When Marin has gone, she took her bottle of sleep draught and her coat buttons done back up and gave Ember a careful goodbye on her way out, and you have replaced the spent spirit lamp with a fresh one and are writing up the label cards for Marta Greenmere's 12 bottles. You hear the sound of the step outside before the knock. Not quite footsteps. More like the deliberate, careful placement of weight. Someone coming down Sable Street with attention, not hurriedly. And then a knock. 3 times. Even, unhurried. And a pause. You know this knock. You set down the pen. Come in, you call. Thea Wren does not come in the way other people come in. She opens the door and she enters the room, and it is as though the room accepts her. The way a room accepts a draught of particular air, not intrusively, but pervasively. She is the forest witch, and she carries the quality of the bramble with her wherever she goes, even when it is subtle, a smell of cold outdoor air and green things and wood smoke, a slightly different proportion of stillness about her than most people carry. She is middle-aged and not middle-aged. She is dressed in layers, as she always is, dark wool over dark linen over dark something else underneath, and she carries a cloth bag that makes a particular soft sound when she sets it on the counter, the sound of dry herbs shifting and settling. Ember looks up from the shelf and blinks once and looks away. This is Ember's version of welcome. Good evening, Thea says to you. Good evening, you say. I wasn't expecting you tonight. Nor was I, she says, with the small, careful smile she has. But the walk was calling, and I followed it here. She looks around the shop with the same calm attention she brings to everything. Her eyes find the cooling bottles on the workbench. You've been busy. Last batch before the frost, you say. I thought so. She unlatches the cloth bag and reaches in with unhurried hands. Which is partly why I came. I was doing my last walk of the season today, the path along the north side of the bramble, and I found something I didn't expect to find. She sets 3 small bundles on the counter. You come to look at them. You are not immediately certain what they are. Small, dried, wrapped in a dry leaf and tied with a grass cord. They smell of something deep and dark and a little sweet, like the smell of the forest floor in late autumn, but concentrated, more intentional than that. Like the essence of late autumn distilled into something you could hold in your hand. Night bloom, Thea says. Late season. The frost took some of it. I thought it was all gone. This path usually sees it finish in early autumn. But there was a sheltered patch. Apparently the warmth off the mountain held it a few weeks longer than usual. You pick up one of the small bundles with careful fingers. Night bloom is rare in Thistlewick. You have worked with it a handful of times in all your years here, and every time, the batches it goes into have had a quality that is difficult to describe except to say they carry a kind of deep, restful dark. Not frightening. More like the quality of a very good sleep, the dreamless kind that leaves you feeling genuinely rested, genuinely renewed. Some people describe the feeling as finding a room in themselves they didn't know existed, that turns out to be warm and quiet and theirs. You hold the bundle carefully. This is a gift, you say. I know, Thea says simply. I thought you'd know what to do with it better than I would. You look at her. I thought, she says almost carefully, that with the frost coming and winter after it, it might be the kind of thing worth having. For the people who need it. She does not need to name who might need it. You both know that winter in Thistlewick is gentle, but winter anywhere has its weight. The long nights. The gray mornings. The way certain people find the inside of their own minds to be a difficult place when there is not enough light, and there is not enough warmth, and the days feel like they are all the same one day repeated. You set the bundle down with the care it deserves. Will you stay while I work with it? You say. Thea looks around the shop, and then at the stool, and then she sets down her bag and unwinds her outer layer, and hangs it on the brass hook by the door. The hook that lives there for exactly this purpose, for neighbors and regulars who stay long enough to take off their coats, and she says, I think I will. What happens next is something you will think about for the rest of the winter, and probably longer. You set the 3 bundles of night bloom on the workbench beside the spirit lamp, and you take a clean pot, smaller than the one you used earlier, a narrow copper vessel with a long handle, and you fill it with water from the cistern. Thea pulls up the second stool and sits at the edge of the workbench, her hands resting in her lap, watching. Can I help? She says. Tell me about where you found it, you say. That will help. This is a thing you have learned over the years, that knowing the origin of something, truly knowing it, not just the species and the properties but the actual place, the way the light fell, what was growing around it, what the air smelled like, gives something to a batch that changes how it works. A small magic, a domestic one, but real. Thea says, the north path. It curves around behind the old forager's cairn. You know the one. I know it, you say. You have been to the cairn. A pile of stones old enough to have moss on the moss, tucked in a bend of the path where the trees open just enough to let the sky in. The night bloom was growing in the shadow of the cairn, Thea says. In the leaves. The frost had taken the outer plants, but there were 3 good crowns right up against the north face of the stone where something warm comes off it. Some warmth in the stone that comes from the sun, or from under the earth, I've never been sure. The crowns were very dark. Darker than I usually see. Almost black. She pauses. But the smell was strong. Stronger than I expected from plants that late in the season. You are warming the water as she talks. Low flame. Patient. How did the path feel? You ask. She thinks about this. Very still, she says. The way the bramble gets when it's thinking. A pause, and then she adds, I know that sounds like the kind of thing you're not supposed to say. I know exactly what you mean, you say. She nods. The light was going when I found them. That blue-gray light, just before dark. The path had that quality of holding its breath. She is quiet for a moment. I almost walked past. And then I didn't. You nod. The water begins to warm. You take the first bundle of night bloom and you unwrap it with careful hands. The dried flowers inside are very small, smaller than they look in the bundle, and very dark, almost the color of dried plums, and the smell rises immediately as you uncover them. Something deep. Something that smells of late autumn and rest and the long dark. It's strong tonight, Thea says, softly. It is. You say. You hold the opened bundle over the pot and you let a small measure of petals fall into the warming water. They land without a sound. They begin to turn, very slowly, in the slight movement of the heating water. I've been thinking, Thea says, after a while, about the winter. What about it? Whether to take on another apprentice, or something like one. She folds her hands differently in her lap. There are things I know that I haven't been able to find anyone to pass them to. The forest has its own particular magic and it doesn't travel well. It has to be learned in place, over time, from someone who knows it. And I'm not. She stops. I'm not getting younger. Who are you thinking of? You say. I'm not thinking of anyone specific, she says. That's the thing. I don't want to choose wrong. She looks at the warming pot. Someone who would come to the bramble and feel it. Someone who wouldn't be afraid of it, but also not someone who isn't afraid of anything. The kind of person who can hold both at once. You think of Pip, briefly. Then think that Pip's path is a different one. Then think that you are not the one to make this choice for Thea and that it is enough to simply hold the thought alongside her. You'll know, you say. I expect so, she says. I'm just being impatient about it. You're allowed, you say. She makes a quiet, dry sound that is almost a laugh. The night bloom is steeping now. The water has taken on a color you can barely describe. A dark amber that has something purple in it, something that catches the lamplight and seems to absorb it rather than reflect it. The smell has deepened and spread through the room. You can feel it at the edges of your own awareness, a gentle pull toward something that feels like the beginning of rest. You take a slow breath. Ember, from the shelf near the door, gives a long, luxurious yawn. She does not seem to notice she is doing it. Thea notices. Your cat, she says. Not mine, you say. She belongs to the street. She belongs to here, Thea says. Tonight, at least. You add a small drop of honey to the night bloom steep. Not the full measure you would use for the sleep draught. Night bloom is powerful enough that it needs less sweetening, and too much honey can mask the subtlety of it, that particular quality of depth it brings. Just a suggestion of sweetness. Just enough to round the edge. You stir. The glass rod moves through the pot slowly, and the color shifts as you stir, darker in the swirl, lighter at the edges where the warm water hasn't fully mixed. You watch it the way you always watch a working, with full attention, which is the same thing as care. The room has become very quiet. Not the quiet of absence. The quiet of presence. The quiet of two people in a warm room and a fire, and something brewing that smells like the deep end of autumn, and the Harbour Bell about to ring 8, and the first frost settling outside on the cobblestones of Sable Street. The Harbour Bell rings 8. You and Thea both count it without speaking. When it finishes, Thea says, "How many bottles do you think?" "Not many," you say. Night bloom isn't for every day. 4, maybe 5. For who, you think? The ones who need it most, when winter gets long. You look at the pot. I'll know them when they come. Thea nods slowly. That's the right way with something like this, she says. Not for everyone. For the ones who've been carrying something. You take the pot off the heat. You set it on the ceramic tile. You stand together, you and Thea, shoulder to shoulder, almost, and you look at the dark copper pot and the almost purple amber brew inside it, still moving slightly from the stirring, catching the candlelight in a way that makes it seem deep, dimensionless, like looking into still water. Extraordinary, Thea says, softly, and it is. You let the night bloom steep rest for 20 minutes before bottling it. During those 20 minutes you and Thea drink tea. You make a fresh pot, chamomile again, simple, because there is chamomile and there is chamomile, and after night bloom it is exactly right to come back to something simple and gentle. And you sit at the counter, you on the low stool and Thea on the tall one, and the conversation becomes less deliberate. It meanders. She tells you about the bramble in early winter, the quality of silence in the trees when the leaves are gone and the snow has not yet come, that specific week or two when the forest is bare and gray and perfectly still, and there is a clarity to it that the leafy months don't have. She tells you about the fox family that lives near the cottage, 3 of them. She suspects 2 young ones from this year's litter, who have not learned yet to be cautious of her and so are not, and she finds them in her garden occasionally in the evenings, digging for things or simply sitting in ways that suggest they feel at home. I don't mind them, she says. I didn't think you would, you say. You tell her about the summer, things she may not have heard, about the Chandler Vera's new arrangement of candles in the shop window, how she has been experimenting with layering scents in a way that is genuinely interesting, about the small repair that was done to the Harbour Bell tower in July, which changed the tone of it slightly, just slightly, and whether you have noticed, whether it sounds different to her too, about a new kind of tea cake that Fenwick's bakery has been making on Friday. Mornings only, dense with dried fruit and something spiced that you cannot identify. Thea listens well. She always listens well. This is the quality in her that you trust most. The candles on the counter burn lower. At some point you get up and light 2 more, because the room has been getting slowly dimmer without either of you quite noticing, and the new candles change the quality of everything slightly. A warmer color, a little more movement in the flame, the smell of beeswax rising. You look at the clock above the backroom door, 8:30. Time to bottle the night bloom. You bring 5 amber bottles to the workbench, the smallest ones you have, dark glass, wide stoppered. You set them in a row and you take the night bloom from the tile and you fill the bottles with care, slowly, watching the dark amber pour. Each bottle takes on the color fully when it is stoppered, something that doesn't quite happen until the glass encloses it, a depth that suggests more inside than the size of the bottle could contain. You set the stoppers one by one. You take the pen and the small cards and you write the labels in your careful hand. Not the full name. Night bloom is not a word you want out in the world freely, not because there is any harm in it, but because it is specific and the right person will understand it and the wrong person won't need it. You write, instead, deep rest, late autumn, for the long nights. You tie each card to each bottle with a length of thin cord. You line them up on the small separate shelf, the shelf at the end of the counter that you keep for the particular things, the ones that are not for sale in the regular sense but for the right person who needs them. There are 4 other bottles on that shelf already, all different, all waiting for their person. Now there are 5 more. Thea watches. When you set the last bottle in its place, she says, "That is exactly right." "Thank you," you say, "for the night bloom, for coming." "I was glad of the walk," she says. She glances at Ember, who has somehow migrated from the shelf to the top of the work surface beside the night bloom bottles, where she is sitting in a composed and meditative posture, regarding them with half-closed amber eyes. "Your street cat approves," she says. "She approves of most things," you say, "as long as they're warm." Thea gets up from the stool with the easy movement of someone who spends a lot of time outdoors and whose body knows itself. She takes her coat from the brass hook, unhooks it, shakes it, settles it over her shoulders. She picks up her cloth bag from the counter, lighter now without the night bloom in it. "I'll be in town again in a few weeks," she says. "After the first snow, probably. I want to check with Greenmere's about the rosehip harvest." "Come by," you say. "I will," she says. She looks at the shop one more time, the soft look of someone taking a room with them when they leave it. "Rest well tonight," she says. "You've done good work today." She opens the door. The bell rings. The cold air comes in, sharp and dark and smelling of frost on stone and distance, the smell of a night that has committed to winter. And then she is gone. And the door is closed. And the shop bell gives its last small shiver and goes still. The room after Thea leaves is different from the room after Pip left, or after Marin left. When Pip left, the room held a kind of energized quiet, the presence of a question still settling. When Marin left, the room held a warm, personal quiet, the presence of a decision made, of something set in motion gently. When Thea leaves, the room holds a deep quiet, the kind that has always been there, under everything, and that the evening's company has revealed rather than created. You stand in it for a moment. Ember is still on the work surface beside the night bloom bottles, and she is now lying down, her paws folded, her eyes fully closed. Her sides rise and fall slowly. Asleep, or very close to it. You blow out the 2 candles you lit. The room dims, but the original 2 candles on the counter are still burning, and the spirit lamp on the workbench, and the room settles into its evening quiet at a lower warmth of light. You do the last things. You move the sleep draft bottles, the 20 from the main batch, from the workbench to the storage shelf in the back room, all but 2 that you leave on the front shelf, available. You tidy the workbench, the empty pot to the washing basin, the stirring rod to its holder, the small dishes stacked and set aside. You wash the 2 mugs from this evening's tea and the pot and the strainer, and you set them to dry on the low shelf by the basin. You check the spirit lamp and lower the flame to its nighttime level, low enough that it will not be a concern, high enough to keep the room from going cold before morning. You write the day's record in the small ledger below the counter, the batch made, the number of bottles, the delivery to be made tomorrow to Greenmere's, the night bloom bottles noted carefully with a brief description of their origin and composition, the visitors received and what was given. You keep this record not because anyone requires it of you, but because you have always found that recording a thing makes it real in a different way than simply having done it. The record is its own kind of presence. You close the ledger. You look around the shop one more time, the way you always do at the end of the evening. The shelves of amber and green glass bottles, each one in its place, the labels in your careful hand. The worn dark wood of the counter. The 2 candles burning low. The night bloom bottles on their separate shelf, 5 dark shapes in the amber candlelight, their small label cards hanging still. The brass hook by the door, empty now, nothing hanging on it until the next person who comes and stays. The faint smell of the evening's work, the sleep draft and the night bloom and the chamomile layered over the always present beeswax and dried herbs of the shop itself. Ember on the workbench, breathing slowly in and out in the even rhythm of genuine sleep. You blow out the first candle. The room becomes softer. You take the last candle, and you carry it carefully to the door, the small flame cupped in one hand against any draft. The cobblestones outside are white. You see it through the glass of the door, the faint, pale dusting on the dark cobblestones of Sable Street, the first frost of the year settling on Thistlewick like something careful and quiet. The lamp posts on the street throw a low light across it. The frost makes the whole street glow slightly, as though the cobblestones have decided to become something else tonight, something between stone and sky. You stand and look at it for a long moment. The first frost. As promised, as expected, as welcomed. The world turning its page. In the morning, Marta Greenmere will be pleased with her 12 bottles. Pip will come to pick them up, probably, stamping his feet on the mat, and looking up at the amber bottle on the high shelf, and carrying the thought you gave him still warm in his chest. The market square will be silver white until the sun rises over the harbour hills and turns it ordinary again. Old Aldrich will look at the sky and say something about the winter ahead, some quality of it he can read there, and he will be right in the way he usually is. And the bramble will be quiet and grey and clear. And Thea will be walking back to her cottage, her footsteps careful in the new frost, the cloth bag over one shoulder, her breath a soft fog in the cold air. And Marin will be at home, sitting down to write her letter to Caldmere. And somewhere on Sable Street, the frost is settling on the cobblestones outside your door, and the shop is warm behind you, and the night bloom is waiting on its shelf for the people who will need it when the winter gets long. You blow out the last candle. In the dark, the frostlight from the street comes in under the door, just a little. Just enough to see by. You lock the door. The sound of the lock is quiet, familiar, the sound of a day properly closed. You stand in the dark for a moment, in the smell of beeswax and chamomile, and the faint last trace of night bloom, and you let the day go. It was a good one. The shop settles around you like a hand set gently on your shoulder. Outside, Sable Street is frost and lamplight and the distant, barely there sound of the harbour. The town is quiet. The bell will not ring for another 20 minutes, and by the time it does, you will be on your way home down the lane, your breath soft in the cold air, the cobblestones white underfoot. But for now, just this. The dark. The warmth. The smell of the last batch. The first frost settling on Thistlewick. Everything is fine. Nothing is urgent. This day is done. And somewhere on the shelf, the amber bottle sits in the dark and holds its long, patient secret. And the shop breathes. And breathes. And breathes.